Well, decades before George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, or Trayvon Martin, there was a young man whose name became a rallying point for the black community. You might not know his story, but you're about to. And it's a graphic one, and we warn you, it comes with graphic images and descriptions.
Now, this young man was brutalized because of his interaction with a white woman. Now, what his mom did was just absolutely astounding after that. Now, 13 Action News is committed to keeping the conversations about race relations going as we continue bridging the divide.
And 13 Action News reporter Alicia Patillo shows you some of the early milestones in the civil rights movement.
But when you're in another man's country, in another man's land, under another man's flag, and under another man's government, and under another man's court system, you have to look to that other man for justice, and you'll never get it. And Negroes in this country probably are authorities on that.
It was 1877 in America. The Civil War had ended 12 years earlier, but the freedoms black people were promised during the Reconstruction era never came to be. Black people in the South were still living the oppressions of the Jim Crow laws. As the 1890s drew to an end, the Supreme Court would issue a landmark ruling.
Homer Plessy is trying to desegregate Louisiana boxcars. The case fails. It's sponsored by the NAACP, but it doesn't work. And that decision essentially institutes what we call separate but equal. So by 1896, it is very clear that the federal government, the Supreme Court, has dictated that states have the opportunity to construct their own laws as long as facilities are separate but equal.
It's a ruling that would set the stage for systemic racism, periods of civil unrest, riots, and continued inequality for generations to come.
I grew up in St. Joseph, Louisiana. Tensas Parish, which is the smallest and the poorest parish in the United States of America. We went to school in the spring from 8 o'clock in the morning to noon because the cotton season was in. So whether you were picking cotton or not, we lost our education during that time. Our colleagues on the other side of town, the white students, went until 3:30.
By the early 1950s, black people were working hard to challenge segregation laws in public schools. Public schools are where they found success. In 1951, Oliver Brown filed a class action suit against the Board of Education in Topeka, Kansas, on behalf of his daughter, Linda Brown, who was denied entrance to an all-white school. The case was heard before the U.S. Supreme Court. Justices ruled racial segregation of children in public schools was unconstitutional, remaining to this day the benchmark for education and racial divide. A major rallying point for civil rights would come the following year in 1955.
Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar tree.
I think most people recognize the name, and they probably recognize the name as the boy that was killed in Mississippi. But most people don't know his mother's name, despite the fact that it was because of her efforts that we know who he is, and that his death meant something for social change.
30 days ago, I was very busy getting Emmett to go away on a trip that I thought would be the highlight of his 14 years. And I have taken every precaution to make it his nicest trip ever.
Emmett Till was from the south side of Chicago. In late August of 1955, his mother, Mammy, sent Emmett down to Money, Mississippi to visit his cousins and his great-uncle, Reverend Mose Wright. Although Jim Crow laws were in place across the U.S., they were enforced differently depending on the region you were in, meaning the way Till was treated in Illinois was going to be much different than the way he would be treated in Mississippi.
One thing that Mamie Till would often say about her son was that he was a free spirit, he was very gregarious, he was very friendly to people. It made it very dangerous for a young man with his personality to go down south and interact with white people. Prior to him leaving, his mother had a talk with him. And the talk was, this is how you interact with people in the South. This is how you interact with white people. This is what you say, this is what you don't say, and this is what you don't do.
The trip was going well until they reached a store in Mississippi owned by Carolyn and Roy Bryant. Till's cousin will never forget what happened next.
One of the boys came up to me and say, man, you got a crazy cousin. He just went in there and said bye to that white woman.
That white woman was the store owner, Carolyn Bryant. Multiple witnesses, including Till's cousins, claimed they heard him whistle on his way out. Till's mother would later explain he had a speech impediment that caused him to whistle when he said certain words.
The whistle was taken by Carolyn Bryant as, a flirtatious suggestion. And this is what she would tell her husband.
In the early morning of August 28th, Carolyn's husband, Roy, and his half-brother, J.W. Malam, invaded the home of Mose Wright.
Everyone knows why they're there, but it's at night, and they can't do anything. Who are they going to call? They can't call the police.
Despite Wright pleading with the men, they took Till from the home. His uncle would later find out from police that Till's body was found.
He didn't have on any clothes at all. His body was so badly damaged that we couldn't hardly just tell who he was.
His body beaten so brutally to the point of disfigurement.
Ears chopped off, a hole punched through his eye. It was to the point where he was unrecognizable.
Shot in the head before his body was dumped into the Tallahatchie River.
But if it wasn't for the efforts of Mamie Till to demand that her son's body was delivered to her in Chicago so she could identify him, we might not know the name Emmett Till.
After identifying Emmett, his mother insisted on an open casket funeral so all the world could see, she said, what they did to my boy.
Which is probably one of the most heroic, if not traumatic, things that a mother would be forced to do under these circumstances. She allowed her son's pictures to be taken in his mangled corpse, and at his funeral, which I think 50,000 African Americans attended, she allowed an open casket. She was very intentionally indicting the United States by suggesting that this is what you allow to happen to black children.
This time, the world could not look away from this dark cloud of racism over America. Less than 2 weeks after his funeral, a trial began demanding justice for Emmett. At trial, there were few witnesses besides Emmett's uncle, Mose Wright. On September 23, 1955, an all-white jury deliberated for less than 1 hour before delivering a not guilty verdict. 1 year after their acquittal, the men admitted in a magazine that they did kill Emmett Till. And decades later, Carolyn Bryant recanted her own testimony.
Every time a young black man or boy is killed, we always remember what happened to Emmett Till as a way for us to never forget and to always seek justice for those who are taken either by police violence or vigilante violence.
Alicia Patillo, 13 Action News.